Okay, we're going to switch gears for a minute here, and we're going to start talking about how we're going to display this thing. I thought that a great way to do that, given that we've decided it's a Navy plane now, is to give it an aircraft carrier kind of flight deck base. I toyed around with a few different ways to do that. I started with just a regular, just a flat base, something like this foam board. But I really like the good old-fashioned wooden base. At first I thought about taking just the good old-fashioned wooden base and staining it, but how does that in any way, reflect Navy carriers? So the first thing I thought about was I'm just going to paint this like a flight deck. Then I thought about if I want to get a little bit more realistic, just to go that extra little mile, I would try to duplicate the non-slip sort of coating. If you've ever been on an aircraft carrier deck, it's rough, it's not smooth. So I thought about various ways I could do that, and I thought one of the easiest yet realistic ways was to just take some finer grit sandpaper, right, and make that our carrier deck. So I was feeling around for something that might represent the right scale, and I'm still not sure what to actually use, but I thought something that would be passable in terms of feel if somebody wanted to touch it, and look when it was all done, was 180 grit. Not too fine, not too rough. I could probably get away with going finer than this. I could probably get away with going much finer than this. But in terms of catching the eye, even though it might be a little bit out of scale for what we're doing, I thought that this would work out really nicely. But just looking for just kind of a shortcut just to save some time, I downloaded a high-resolution image of a carrier deck. And I got this. And this is just printed on plain old paper. My grand plan was to just give this kind of a primer light gray coat, print this image onto that 8x10 decal paper, and then just put the decal paper right on here. Obviously, after I sprayed it, I was going to give it a nice glossy coat, and then trim it to fit the top of this wood plaque. Unfortunately, I went through 3 pieces of decal paper. I don't know what was going on. I couldn't get it to look better than this, and this one I canceled before it even finished. So obviously, this is not going to do. I toyed with the idea of forgetting about our kind of textured look and just taking this piece of paper and putting it on top of there and then spraying a gloss coat over everything. But I didn't want to get that lazy about it. So here's what I ended up deciding. I'm going to take the sandpaper. We're going to take this piece of paper as a model. We're going to give it a very dark gray, just on the other side of black base coat over there. Then using this, I'm going to print a few more of these out. Basically as a mask, I'm going to cut out all of the grayish white areas. I'm going to overlay that. I'm going to spray that. Why am I going to do it that way? Because normally you'd spray your lightest colors first, because I want it to look dirty. I want to give it that worn color. And rather than trying to weather the white to look black, we're just going to let the black undercoat work for us, just like almost like a pre-shading. And that way we just leave a lighter coat of white where we want it to look a little darker and more worn, and just spray more of the white on there where we want it to look lighter. Once that's done, we don't really need to mask anything off for the other colors, because we basically have an outline of where everything goes, so then we just need to tape over the white, spray the red and the yellow, and then I really think, just to get these little tie-down points, since it's such a complicated thing to mask off and paint, literally I think I'm going to cut these things out and just glue them into place on top. Once that's all done, I'm going to cut that to shape and just glue the whole thing onto the top there. And that is going to give us a flight deck to rest this guy on top of when it's all done. And I think it's going to look pretty nice. For the rest of it, I'm going to do just the standard stuff that you would do for a base like this. I'm going to sand it down nice and smooth. I'm going to stain it with red oak, because that comes out really nice. I've done a number of wood bases for aircraft, and this just comes out really nice. We're going to use polyurethane clear gloss on top of that, a few coats with some very light sanding in between. And I think it's going to look really gorgeous, honestly. You're going to have your carrier deck on top. You're going to have the wood edges under there underneath. May or may not make some kind of nameplate on there, US Navy, F-19, VF-103. Still messing with that idea, I don't know. But that's how we're going to display this when it's all done. I thought about even going so far as to getting some scale tie-down chains and drilling into there, but I don't want to do that. Mainly because, for moving this thing around and everything, I want to be able to actually remove the plane to transport it in 2 pieces. And if we were to do that, we'd have to drill into the plane, drill into the wood, and that's all kinds of complicated. So, I'm going to get working on this right now, starting with getting our sandpaper ready to give the initial dark gray / light black. Is light black even a thing? But initial coat on the sandpaper. Okay, so what do you guys think? Here is my almost completed aircraft carrier deck plate. Took me a little longer than I thought. I didn't prime the sandpaper, and so I had a lot of paint peel when I used the tape. But only thing I'm missing here are the tie down points, because I don't have a really good way of doing that right now. And I just think it's going to look a little unnatural to just cut things like this out and paint them down there. So I need to come up with a good template or something. I'm really happy with the effect that we ended up on this, and I'm going to try to get a really good shot. That's still wet. So I ended up just mixing some European 1 gray with some black to give us that very dark gray, blackish color. Sprayed the whole thing down with that. I let that sit for a little bit just to get the base color down. Once I was done there, you can see kind of the weathering there, some oil stains. We've got some parts of the deck that were like repainted, cover up some spots, and I wanted it to be weathered, but not too weathered. I understand there's some wrinkles. When we glue this down to the wood, obviously the wrinkles will be gone. There's some tire tracks from one of the little tractors along the deck. I don't know, you can't pick it up in the light here, but the gray is mottled in different areas, so I mean, I'm really happy the way this came out. So first I gave it a universal, very dark gray. Then I did some overspray in a little areas with a little lightened gray. Still very close to black though. My original plan to just use the paper as kind of like a mask wasn't going to work for various reasons. So I ended up using tape. I just laid it over the paper, cut the tape out, and then masked off various areas here and there. Sprayed the gray first. I used light gray, FS36495. I'm not sure. I didn't want to use a pure white, because I'm sure that's what it really is on the deck of the carrier. The glossiness on some of these oil spill areas is going to stay glossy as everything dries, which is going to look really cool. So kind of like an in-action scene there. Then I masked off the yellow, then the red. I did some touch-ups as the black peeled off. Then I took the dark gray peeled off. Then I just took some flat black and just did some sprays back and forth and did some brush paintings in different areas to model it up and make it look pretty used, not clean at all. And you can kind of see the texture too, right? With the sandpaper, so it's got that aircraft carrier deck look. I think everything's dry enough to put the plane on. It's not like it matters anyway, because the wheels haven't been done or anything yet. So when we lay our plane on this deck, it's really going to have the look of, a carrier deck active scene there. And we can lay it on any way we want, depending on what details we want to show. I really like the way the little tire tracks showed up there, and got some oil spills and staining on there. It's almost kind of like, I feel like this itself is a nice work there, and I hate to cover it up with the plane, but obviously that's what it's for. In the meantime, I'm going to start doing the sanding around the edges so I can start doing some staining. I'm going to use spray adhesive once I measure this out and cut it. I want to get this really adhered to the wood first before I start putting on the stain though, because I just don't want to run the risk of having the stain kind of seep in here and prevent adhesive from sticking. I'd rather have the adhesive well bonded and set first. So I think I'm going to take a break for tonight though. This was a good 2-3 hours just getting this to work really well, but it came out great. And yeah, just the tie-down points. Once I get it all kind of settled onto the base, I'll worry about the tie-down points. So there's a few steps that I didn't get on camera as I was working. I gave just a little bit of sanding. I used, and I don't have it right here in front of me because I cleaned up, but I like to use these simple sanding sponges, and I used a 120 to 180 grit just to sand down the top, make sure it's nice and smooth, sand all around the edges, to get them nice and smooth and ready. I used some standard, spray adhesive, sprayed the entire rear surface of the sandpaper, and then I made sure I lined up where I wanted the actual edges to be, and then I just laid the top of the wood block on top of it. Once I flipped it over, I just used a little rubber block. I just used a little round rubber block to apply pressure that wouldn't do any damage to the paint job, to make sure that everything was snug and tight. I let it sit till it was dry for a few hours. Then I flipped the block again onto my cutting mat. And the reason I didn't do all this on camera is because I thought it'd be pretty boring and also a little awkward for me to be working in front of there. Once I had it flipped over, I just took a number 11 blade, and this was an awkward position to sort of get that angle. I don't want to touch now because I got stain drying on there, but to get up under and trace all around the sandpaper to trim it to size. Once I had that done, I got the wood stain out. Okay. I love working with this stuff. It's so easy to use. Whenever I'm staining, I don't know, I just prefer to work with foam brushes. I feel like it gives, number one, they're disposable, so you don't have to worry about cleaning them up or anything. Number two, I feel like it just gives really good control of the stain, and it's a nice even coat all the way around. You don't have to worry about air bubbles or anything. That's especially important when we put the polyurethane on, not so much with the stain. But just nice even coverage, works really, really well, and it holds a lot of stain compared to a brush, I find. Some people might disagree with me. But I just made sure I worked that stain in, made sure I was real careful around the deck. We didn't want to get any of that on there. It'd be hard to clean off. So now, all I have to do is just sort of let this absorb into the wood for a little bit to get that color really deep into the wood grain, wipe off the excess, consider doing a second coat or not, and then kind of let it dry overnight, and then we'll continue working. So the stain that I put on has dried overnight. It's just a single coat. I put it on, I let it sit for about an hour, and then just wiped off the excess, put it somewhere safe to dry. You can see there's some dust and stuff just on the surface here because I've had it outside for the last few hours just to give a good final dry in the sunlight. I'm just doing a single coat. I think the color is really nicely absorbed. You can see on the edges. What I really like is, because of the nature of the sandpaper, when I cut it, it got kind of an uneven look. And that was not intentional, but I really like that it sort of, it's not just squared off with the edge. You can see how the stain goes in, and you've got that kind of rough look, which almost makes it look like this deck is sort of, to me, growing out of the wood base, not just plopped right on top of it there. I think that's a happy accident. So as you can see now, if I just run my finger along this, don't have any of this stain coming up on my finger or anything, so it's totally dry. It's ready now for the polyurethane gloss top coat. The reason I'm only doing one coat of the stain here is because I've worked with this before. It's going to really take on a much deeper, darker look. It's really going to bring out the grain of the wood nicely when we put on the polyurethane. Now, I'm hoping that in this sunlight you can kind of see, because I don't think it captured very well inside, you can see the different shades of the dark gray and the black, as if, you know, parts of the deck had been painted over. We've got the oil spots going on. I'm trying not to get, you know, in the shadows too much. I like the very rough kind of patchwork, almost like the deck has been painted over several times to cover up stains and everything. But I don't want it to look like it was just sprayed, like it's brand new. I want this to look used, like they've had to paint over several sections and it's been washed and dirtied. And so this is finally dry and all ready for us to put on the clear polyurethane gloss. This stuff works great. However, this is usually a 3-coat, give or take, depending on how shiny you want it to be. A lot of the time you can get away with just 1 coat of the stain, but I find that this, very often it's going to be 1 coat, let it dry. You're going to take some very fine sandpaper and just buff it out a little bit. Another coat, buff it out, a 3rd or even a 4th coat, and by then though, you've got it like glass. It looks fantastic. So let's just get this can opened up and get going. Nice smooth coating on the wood there. And then really gently, I'm just going to pick out those areas. And because of that happy little accident with the jagged edges on the deck, I just think this is going to come out looking really, really nice. Alright, so there's coat number 1. We're just going to have to let this dry, and it takes a while to dry. A few hours. For this stuff, I like to put this in a little Ziploc bag and just keep it kind of airtight shut. It'll usually last for the duration of one project, a day or so, before it finally hardens up. That way you're not just wasting it. So we are overnight dry here. This is after the first coat. And you can see how in the light it looks shiny. And I mean it is, but it's compared to what we want it to be, it's just not there yet. So I'm not going to sand down this layer. I'm just going to put another coat right on top of this, and then I'm going to start sanding from there. I might actually do a little bit of sanding. It's a little bit rough. But so we've got one coat down. We actually might do 4 or 5 because this is not nearly as glossy as I wanted it to be. But there we go. Coat number 1 is down. Start number 2. So this is after 2 coats, and we're getting a nice gloss on there, but I don't know if you can really see it's a little rough, just a little bit, and the smoother we get this then, the more glossy the finished coats get. So I'm going to start with just some 320 grit, and just really gently, I don't want to sand off what we've got there, I just want to even it out a little bit, so that the next coats can settle down real nice and even. And I want to be really careful that I don't damage that deck surface there either. So just going to start a very light sanding to even it out for the next couple coats of gloss. I want to be really careful. I'm going to fold over the paper to get in that little ledge right there. And really all I do here is I just run my finger there, and when I feel all those little burrs are gone, I mean, I'm done. I don't want to pull too much of anything off. And I do that all around the edge, and we put another coat of gloss on. I'm outside just because it's nice out, but final decision I made was we're not going to do the tie-down points, because if you look at how much is obscured by the airplane, you're really not going to see a lot of it, no matter how we place this plane on the deck. And I just don't want to go through that effort right now for something we're not really going to see. And I think we've got a very, very realistic aircraft carrier deck, minus that one little cat hair there. I think we got a very realistic looking deck anyway. It's got to really accomplish and communicate what we want it to communicate, which is that this is a Navy aircraft sitting on an aircraft carrier deck. I think that's probably the way we'll have it, so you can see the most of the lines and some of the staining and everything, depending on where you look and how you're walking around this. But the tie-down points are really not going to add all that much to it. So I think we're going to call this thing good. I may choose to add a little data plate right about here that gives us the name of our aircraft, maybe the name of the carrier, but I think that we are going to call this a successful base. I really love the way the edges just kind of roughly blend in. Not nice and smooth. But there is one easy to make, very good looking aircraft carrier base.